Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Sharad Kutin. My guest, Jerald Joseph, is a member of the National Human Rights Commission, SUHAKAM as it's affectionately known. It celebrates its 20th anniversary tomorrow. The question is whether the nation is going to celebrate along with it. Because it's had some troubles over the last couple of years, especially under the Najib administration. There was slash in funding and so on and so forth. I mean, to what extent did you feel, I mean, coming into the commission, in fact, the tail end of the Najib administration, did you feel a hostility from the government or the administration at that point in time?
I think the culture was, the commission is a statutory body, so by law, respect needs to be given. So they would invite you in to sit and discuss, but never take you seriously. Our opportunities to meet at the highest level with ministers or secretary generals was very far in between. For an example, we only managed to get, I think, meet 2 ministers in that 2 years under the Najib administration. We tried, not for lack of trying, and we could not. And so our role to advise government on serious policy matters was difficult. On law reform, we're supposed to advise government on what's good for law, but you get invited the day before the law is passed in parliament. I mean, same complaints by the members of parliament, I believe. So it's not the best way to go forward. So we were never taken seriously as an entity on the side of advising government in a better way to comply with human rights.
But what about the slashing of funds? Because that's significant. I mean, your operations, I mean, you get over 1,000 complaints and you have, by all accounts, a small team of 80 people or so to work with. I mean, slashing funds must have a detrimental effect on your ability to work. So
I think that was, if I'm not mistaken, 3.5 years or 4 years ago when 50% was slashed and they justified saying it was a cut across the board, but it affected the commission. Even at present, the commission gets roughly about 10 million ringgit a year. For a staff of 85 plus 8 or 9 commissioners now, that's hardly, that's about 92% just for paying salaries of staff, because you can't cut that, they are there. And commissioners are not paid full time, they are only paid allowance. And you only have about 8 to maybe 9% to do program, which is very strange in an organization. Paris Principle demands that the government adequately fund your Human Rights Commission. So we are underfunded before. When the new government took over, we brought this case up to Finance Minister Mr. Lim Guan Eng, and after listening to our story, we told you, we don't need to convince you how bad prison, and he said, I know, I've been there. And then he added 2 million ringgit to that. So that was our first take on increasing. The test is coming up in a few weeks' time in Parliament, whether we will get the additional funds. But we have.
I want to ask you, I mean, is it about the way that the government considers or thinks about the role of SUHAKAM? If you compare SUHAKAM to other statutory bodies, the Election Commission and all these, is it comparable? Are you treated on an equal level with them?
If I must give you some nitty-gritty example, it will sound petty, but just to prove the comparability with other commissions, I think Anti-Corruption Commission has a huge chunk of work, so you can't compare, but they get about 230 million ringgit, which is probably under budgeted for them, and we get about 10 to 12 million ringgit. So you can't go far with that staff and the amount of complaints we receive. And also we've been requesting, I mean, in the civil service or statutory body, they give you vehicles, the vehicles are 13 to 14-year-old, they're breaking down all the time. And you wonder how come for Human Rights Commission, there's nobody's like looking after us. Other groups that after 5 years, 6 years, you don't spend money repairing the car. So it's just an example of how we've been we are there, but just on a corner. And I think that needs to change. To take the role and function of the Human Rights Commission seriously, because many people walk into our office with their complaints on human rights. The Sabah office gets about 50 complaints a month. Here in Semenanjung, KL, about 50 complaints. Sarawak, about 26 complaints a month. So people are using that avenue to maybe vent, maybe hope for some justice. And this is serious work, and you need to actually fund us to expand our staff team in order for SUHAKAM to really be a household name in
Right.
Malaysia.
I mean, when you look at the present government, the Pakatan Harapan administration, there are various people with different experiences when it comes to either being victims themselves of human rights violations. Mat Sabu was under the Internal Security Act. I mean, the Defense Minister, Lim Guan Eng, as you said, was imprisoned for defending that young girl. So many people, but not all of them, right?
Correct.
And so is there an unevenness in terms of understanding the importance of human rights work to governance in the current administration?
So I think as you pointed out, there was no difficulty in asking to meet ministers when they came into power in the last 1 year. I think within a year we managed to meet 10 ministers plus the Attorney General plus the Prime Minister, first time ever. SUHAKAM has met so many in a period of 12 to 13 months, which means you did not need to convince them of our role and function because they understood what it was. But I think there lies the challenge. It's the whole system change has not happened. We are working with the top brass who you don't need to convince, they understand what you're saying, but then after they go off, it's the second tier, third tier, which is still the same civil service that actually need to come on board as human rights partners. So I think their jailing or their victims of the human rights violation in the many years actually is a good testament for them doing good policies, but there is now a disjoint in the implementation part that I think Malaysia is seeing. All the promises to change, to do this is not really happening.
I want to take up some of the recent cases like the raids that we've had on Shia communities over the last couple of days, and I know SUHAKAM has issued a statement about this, very concerned about these raids. There we see maybe actions or behavior of government coming from different authorities, not necessarily under the control of cabinet, right? So this would be the religious authorities, the police, for instance, might have their own mind when it comes to this. Is that the tougher game now? Working with police, working with religious authorities to get them to appreciate these human rights principles and having them to conform to them?
Correct. I think working with the police, they have been, police, prisons, immigration have been our closest partners because of our visits to the detention centers, all the complaints linked with a lot of enforcement. So we've had a to and fro relationship, and I would say in the last year there's much more openness in the police to work with us. So it's not with the police that is difficult because there's a whole reform agenda with the IPCMC. So I think our recent meeting with the IGP was very positive. He says there's no two ways about things. We need to clean the house up, and I'm here to clean it up. So I think on that score it's fine, but there is a defensiveness when the Human Rights Commission comes in. They always think we are out to attack them. I don't know where they get this idea. I mean, if you see something not right, we have to spell it out, but we are there to work to make it better. We're not there to grind you to the ground and kick you out. That's not our role. But somehow or other, when we come in, it's so, to hear these critical words are painful for them and they take it personally.
Right. Is it because, of course, over the years there hasn't been that kind of scrutiny? It's something. It's a kind of cultural change that needs to happen in governance.
Totally agree, and I think that's why human rights must be a common norm of this government. They should not shy away and feel like, don't touch this because this is sensitive. There are groups that are out to attack human rights, and you mentioned about the Shia raid. So we voiced our concern like we did before, even in the old government. We said the same things, hoping that there will be new ways of handling such delicate matters. I mean, given that Malaysia has a different view of how to handle the Shia and Sunni, but there must be some other way of moving forward. Dialogue, discussion. You don't need raids to put them down all the time. And Malaysia was part of the Aman message that actually respects Islam world as having different schools of thoughts, and I think our Prime Minister then, Tun Badawi, was part of that meeting.
Yeah, and I think Khairi Jamaluddin also one of the many signatories to that, right? I think there were a handful of Malaysian politicians. Very quickly, do you think, and are you confident that this government promising to roll back the repressive laws we associated with 5 decades of Barisan National rule, do you think that's going to happen? Are people very impatient? Sedition Act has not been repealed, so on and so forth.
So I still believe it's going to happen. At least they're struggling to make it happen, which is a good sign. There's so many interagencies meeting that we have been party to. I think NGOs are also party to. Never before NGOs have been kept out of the loop. And so I think this kind of meetings where ministers are calling and they're getting input to discuss, to get the heat and then have a reaction, I think is a good way. Whether we will see it happening before their 5-year term is up, I think the rollout is happening. But it should be done in a more informative way. It's not like we are playing a guessing game. Like this coming parliament, which one is coming? So we look at the long list and we are playing. I think it shouldn't be. You can tell us, okay, these 3 I'm trying to do, the others are difficult. No problem. We'll have patiently work with you for the other thing. But I think this government needs to step up its work on not only the policy and law reform, but actually take up the more difficult issues, especially on the race and religious issue, which is a bane in Malaysia for a long time.
Right, okay, we'll take another break. Stay tuned to consider this.